Here we are once again. No game to look forward to here in Week 10, but hope you're having a great evening. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to Bears All Access, brought to you by IGS Energy. Thanks to our producers, Jordan Tredup and Dan Barilli, and the folks here at The Score. Good to have you alongside. I'm Jeff Joniak with my broadcast partner and Super Bowl Bear, Tom Thayer. And Tommy, coming up, we're going to summarize what has been a rocky ride through the first 9 games and what to look forward to in the final 8. We're going to do that as well, joined by Pro Football Hall of Fame writer Dan Pompei from The Athletic to get his thoughts on a variety of topics. But Tommy, what was your approach as a player for the bye week, and what is it now as an announcer?
Jeff, we never had a bye week. Because we practiced during the bye week. Coach Ditka dangled the carrot in front of our faces that if we practiced well during the bye week, in which we are in full pads every day, that we would get Saturday off. We did not have this luxury of the collective bargaining agreement making sure that you gave a responsible amount of time off for the players to recover. So as much as, they wanted to call it a bye week, it was only a bye week in the sense you didn't have a game on Sunday.
Do you think it's worthwhile now, though?
Of course I do.
Yeah.
I think any ways that you can benefit these players to get a little rest, recovery to their bodies. I don't want them to leave the game mentally, because you can forget a lot of really important information quickly if you stay away from your iPad, or if you're a player that's on the cusp or on the verge of understanding what every one of your assignments is. But a guy like Akeem Hicks, a guy like Khalil Mack, a guy like Eddie Jackson, Allen Robinson, these guys can recover during this week of not being on their feet to the point where they can play when they get ready to practice next week.
Well, I thought it was interesting, and it probably doesn't shock me, but Justin Fields basically, according to Matt Nagy at his news conference on Monday, said, yeah, he's not going to get away from the game. It's just not who he is.
You can't.
Yeah, which is a good thing for him, though. That's a good thing for a young quarterback.
But I think it is equally as much for Larry Borum or, Travis Gibson, from all these, Kendall Vildor, Jalen Johnson, Duke Shelley, all these guys that are still learning the information to master their craft. It's equally as important for those guys at that position.
Justin Fields, after the game on the WBBM postgame show, after the loss in Pittsburgh, was very pleased with certain aspects of things, frustrated with another slow start with the offense in terms of penalties and field position of the first half, but he says those chunk plays started to happen.
We've been trying to, create more explosive plays from the get-go, and, we're just going to continue to do that, and just like I said before, when we start the game, we got to start fast and, finish fast.
Tom, did you see significant steps in development for Justin in that second half?
Yes. Jeff, I want to go back to say I think this was the most important game the Bears played this season, because when you heard the Bears come out of the tunnel and that stadium was about half full, it was as loud as any stadium that's, completely full. And so for the Bears, even though they had such poor starting field position early in the game, they never let that compound into such a lead by the opponent that they couldn't overcome that. I think there's so many building blocks that you can take from this game, whether it's the performance of Justin or the performance of, the line, making sure that they stayed in tune with what they are going to try to accomplish, how well the defense played up front early portions of that game. I think this game has a chance to play dividends going forward, even though they ended up losing the game.
Matt Nagy on the Bears Coaches Show on Monday night on News Radio 105.9 WBBM about Fields getting the ball to his playmakers.
I think what's happening is you're starting to see Justin feel more and more comfortable with these reps he's getting with these particular receivers and running backs. And now we got to grow off of that. We're kind of finding a nice little balance schematically with what we like to do with them. We're finding out what his strengths and weaknesses are. And we're trying to put it all, together to make it the best for us.
And part of that, Tom, in addition to keeping that running game revving, because it is the best thing they do as a team on any unit right now, that's the number one thing. They run the ball extremely well. Montgomery back, using him in the Wildcat. But the emergence of Cole Kmet here is something to keep an eye on. And, frankly, the week before was Jesse James, and then Jimmy Graham, what Nagy called Probably the best throw that you're going to see anybody make on an NFL field to Jimmy on that 28-yard play. I mean, these are developments. Darnell Mooney has a big play threat developing.
Yeah, I do like to keep the veterans incorporated in the game plan. That play you talk about to Jimmy Graham. But I was equally as impressed by the third down throw that he made to Allen Robinson.
Yep.
Because if you look at the flight of the football, the location of the defender, it was a pass that there's not a lot of guys that can make. But the thing that impressed me most, and listen, man, Dave Montgomery, I'll stand up and shout from the highest mountain how important he is to the success of this team, and I like what I see out Khalil Herbert. But there was a couple plays that reminded me of Russell Wilson, of talking about Justin Fields, because he's really cognizant of where the line of scrimmage is. And even when he was scrambling outside the pocket and it looked like he was trying to put a grab on the football that he was going to run, he was able to readjust it and find a target downfield. One of them was Darnell Mooney for the touchdown. So now if we want to make these comparisons to Russell Wilson and what he put on display early in his career when he was going through the learning stages, I think this is a game in this type of environment that we saw out of Justin.
All right, coming up next, we'll be joined by Dan Pompei for about a half hour. We'll have 3 different segments with the Hall of Fame writer from The Athletic. He'll join the program. Tom and I will be back in just a second here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Welcome back to Bears All Access, brought to you by IGS Energy. Choose clean energy for your home at IGS.com, because every good choice adds up to a better world. Pleased to be joined with Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak, The Athletics, Dan Pompei at Dan Pompei on Twitter, and here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Dan, thanks for taking the time to join us. Let's get into the history, because we lost a piece of history this week with the passing of legendary strength coach Clyde Emerick, a friend to everybody, and as you wrote in a great piece in March of 2019, you profiled him in The Athletic, a revolutionary figure in pro football. And you only have so many people that can carry that label. He truly was a revolutionary figure.
He was, and a true pioneer, as you guys well know. He was the elder statesman of the Bears organization, having spent close to 60 years, or maybe even more than 60 years, in some affiliation with it. And, there's nobody left like him, really. You talk about a guy who started out working with Stan Jones, and then he went to Doug Atkins, and then he went to Butkus and Sayers, and, on and on, Buffon. And then he moves into the Super Bowl era with guys like Tom Thayer. He bragged about Thayer squatting 705 pounds, and all the way to the Brian Urlachers, and then the current regime. He worked with Cody Whitehair and guys on the team now, and in addition to working with people and making them better, I think he touched human beings and made their lives better. And was such a special man to be around. Always had time for you, had a good word for you. He even helped me with weightlifting at one point, and it helped George Hallis at one point. How about that? You're not going to see the like of Clyde Emerick ever again. He's just a truly special man, and God rest his soul.
Danny, he tried to help me, as Tommy knows, and he always called me uncoachable. But, I gave it a good college try. What's unmistakable about him, obviously, is the resume. But from a human point of view, just as a guy, the handshake every time. And the excitement to see you. Hey, Jeffer. Yeah, hey, Jeffer. And that firm handshake into his 80s. I would love to know what that grip strength was all about.
It's just years of being a dedicated weightlifter. Some of the stories he tells me as him being a high school kid when he got introduced to weightlifting, and he was kind of an introverted soul. And his activity after school was going to a weight room, whether it was inside of his house in the most primitive of conditions to when he started going to the YMCA. And he didn't attract attention because of his personality. He attracted attention because of what he did in the weight room. His physique, the way that you took what was weightlifting back in the 50s to where it became in this generation. And I think when you have a footprint in the NFL like he left behind, and like Dan mentioned, you're handpicked by the guy that started the NFL, George Halas, and it's carried a legacy to every strength coach from now into the past. All has some type of Clyde Emerick, handprint on him. I just think that it's amazing because he treated everybody equally, whether he was trying to rehab a guy like Ed McCaskey during his time with the Bears, to trying to give help and inspiration to Virginia McCaskey when she was recovering from injuries, and then to the modern day players, how he inspires them, and the conversations you had with him. If you listen to what he had to say, you came out a better person because of it. And I think every single person that's come across that is inspiring. And I always used to ask Clyde as a joke. I always used to say, Clyde, who's your favorite player? And I wanted him to say me, but he always say, Doug Plank. I love that guy. If you ever got to know what that guy's all about. So, Clyde didn't pull punches. He told you exactly and as honestly as he could answer whatever question you asked him. And, I'm just super happy in my life that I got to know and become and stay friends with a man like Clyde Emerick.
I think Danny was struck by just the individual accomplishments because, I read in that story that you wrote that Brian Urlacher used to do a bear crawl backwards down steps. Was that a Brian original or was that a Clyde-induced idea?
I believe it was a Brian original, but I think I did that a few times too after a night out, after a late night getting home, but I wasn't doing it to get better though.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Tom mentioned Doug Plank too. He used to take, Clyde told me this story. Plank used to, I've probably told Tom this story too. Used to take 100-pound dumbbells and power clean them 10 times for reps. He said, I didn't know of anyone else who can do that. Doug Plank is a normal-sized human being, and he had this incredible power, incredible will, and, Clyde had a way, I think, of bringing that out of everybody, and that's really the point that he made so many Chicago Bears better than they could have been had he not been a part of their lives. And I know, Tom, you would say the same, that he probably made you into a better football player.
Well, that was the unique quality. Clyde constructed your body however it was meant to be constructed. I was a different weightlifter than Steve McMichael. Steve McMichael was a different weightlifter than Jim Morrissey. And so no matter who you were and how your body was shaped, Clyde designed whatever needed to be done, which was the best for you. And when you talk about those power clean dumbbells, and when I became a member of the Bears, Clyde was as active in the weight room as any player in there. And he was the type of guy that would do one-arm snatches with a 120-pound dumbbell. And it wasn't a proving ground, it was inspiration. And that's just the way he carried himself in the weight room. He was so unique about the way that he went about his business in a really undersized weight room. But I think it was the most important development of team camaraderie was the way he led the guys when they got to the weight room. It was different than what we did on the field, but what we did in the weight room was equally as important to the construction of the Bears for generations.
Dan Pompei from The Athletic, the Hall of Fame writer in the Pro Football Hall of Fame for his years of outstanding work, coverage, and reporting, joining us here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Walter Payton deadlifting 625, Dan, at 208. That doesn't seem humanly possible, does it?
Well, again, you're talking about a player who was, beyond human almost, right? The strength and the power that Walter had was truly incredible, and part of what made him who he was. I love the story about him that he used to go up to trees and just wrap his arms around them and uproot them. I mean, who could do that? You know, who could walk on their hands across the field? You know, we've all seen him do many things that just made you stop and stare, and that strength that he had was surely, you know, one of those things. The other interesting thing that Clyde used to tell me is he never did those things in the weight room like you just talked about, Jeff, when the others were around during a team lift. He'd do them when everyone was gone. He'd say, "Hey, Clyde, look what I can do," you know, and that's just so Walter.
You know, I want to give you 3 instances of the weight room. With one was Walter Payton. Somebody was doing deadlifts, and they had about 500 and something pounds on there. And Walter walked in, and just his great personality. How much is that? And Clyde told him how much it was. He told the guy, he goes, "Get away." Gets over there and does a couple reps with it, sets it down, and walks out of the weight room. One day after practice, there was 405 pounds on the bench. And Richard Dent comes in after practice, and he gets underneath it. And Clyde goes, wait, Richard, you got to warm up. Clyde, get away. Clyde goes, okay, gives him a lift off. Richard does a 405-pound bench press, sets it back on the rack, walks out of the weight room. So we are in there, and Johnny Morris was in there with us, and we are filming these heavy lifting segments. And so we used to have this table that was about 3.5 feet high. And William Perry had 50-pound dumbbells in each hand and did 10 reps up and down, a plyometric exercise that Clyde used to have him do all the time. I actually still have a VHS copy. It was these types of guys between Fridge, between Richard, between Walter, that were inspired because Clyde was in the weight room. And they didn't have to put this stuff on display all the time. It was just the inspiration of Clyde in that room. It was these guys kind of wanted to show Clyde, not everybody else. They weren't waiting for people to gather around. So, and I was in there on all 3 of these times with these guys walking in, and it was inspiring to me, but it was also supported, inspired by Clyde.
Talk Bears football with Dan Pompei coming up after this on Chicago Sports Radio, 670 The Score. This segment of Bears All Access is brought to you by Athletico Physical Therapy. Visit athletico.com to request an appointment in clinic or virtually and start feeling better tomorrow. With Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak, and Dan Pompei from The Athletic, the Pro Football Hall of Fame writer, joining us. Parts unknown, on a job, I'm sure. Dan, let's dig into this Bears team. I got to ask you, though, from a professional point of view, when you wrap up a Bears game in The Athletic every Monday morning, it's very succinct comments. Is it harder to write that series of thoughts the way you do and the way you craft it versus a longer form story? What's harder?
Well, thank you, Jeff. What I do after the game is completely almost the opposite of what you guys do, because what you're doing is reactionary and it's instant, right? So I try to take a step back after the game and say, okay, what did we just see that matters, that's significant, that maybe has something to say about what's going to happen moving forward? And, I think it's not terribly difficult. It's just a matter of honing in on the right pieces and kind of looking at what some of the other reactions to what just happened were. And, it's not something I've had some people say to me, some critics say to me, something like, oh, what'd you just do that in 2 minutes after the game? And it's not like that. It's thought, it takes some thought and it takes some kind of deliberation, but it comes out when you really try to focus in on what you just saw and what it means.
Sometimes 2 days after the fact, it's old news. But yeah. Dan, I can't help, because you have such a long history with the Bears. You wrote a book about the 100 years of what this team has gone through. So immediately following the game, like Monday night, and the officiating is such a big part of the story. Can you separate the two of football from officiating? Because it's kind of picked up steam where it's become a national story and it's a topic from everybody. I was listening to Buckus on the Rich Eisen show talking about the officiating. I've listened to 10 national, correspondents talking about the officiating. So how do you separate the two of this instance? And do you think if the story stays as long as it is, it helps or hurts the Bears?
Well, I think it's certainly something that you don't ignore because it was part of the game and part of, what's happening with the Bears this week after the game. And as you said, it's become a story with some legs a little bit, even nationally. I think there were other parts of the game, though, certainly that demanded our attention and, required analysis. So, you don't want to have that one aspect kind of eclipse everything else that happened. But the officiating was certainly a factor and something that people love to focus on officiating. I think almost any time a team loses, there's usually a call or two. They say, well, look at that call. If it had gone the other way, it would have been different. In this case, there were several of those calls.
Right.
And some calls that really left people scratching their head. It was interesting, the one that seemed to get the most attention was the taunting call against Cassius Marsh, which, the NFL has pretty much said, no, that was the right call. And it was one that I really didn't understand all the craziness about that either. I know he didn't do something that was flagrant, but I thought he took a risk by kind of standing and looking at the other sideline or whatever he did, or, put his hands on his hips. One of the points I made in my column after the game is, if I were coaching a team now with all this kind of ambiguity about this taunting call, I would tell every one of my players after every play, you need to walk back to your sideline. Don't dance, don't spike, don't look just go back to the sideline. And if you're incapable of doing that, you got a problem playing for me.
So they call a couple roughing the quarterback penalties against the Bears when there was kind of in the momentum of the play. And then you go back and you watch that tape, no matter what angle you want to look at. There was a couple of hits after the fact that Justin took that he got no respect on the call. Do you think this can change and start giving him the calls that he deserves? Or do you think the officials say, hey, look, I'm not responsible for protecting this guy. That's the job of the team, the offensive line or whatever? Because I think in a game like the other night, some of those calls that Justin should have gotten could help the outcome of the game on behalf of the Bears, where the taunting call really helped benefit the Steelers, and some of the other calls against Roethlisberger that weren't as egregious as we saw happen to Justin.
Those calls certainly should have gone the other way with Justin. But he's got two things working against him. First is that, as you say, he's on the opposite end of the experience spectrum of Ben Roethlisberger. So, until you kind of get that level of respect, I think sometimes the officials look at you a little different. And then the other thing is, he is kind of a mobile quarterback. And if you look at the history of mobile quarterbacks, guys who take off and run with the football, they often do not get the same kind of calls that the more stationary quarterbacks get. Lamar Jackson has complained about it repeatedly, even this year, that, he gets treated more like a running back than a quarterback. That seems to be, a difficulty in officiating from that standpoint. Sometimes I think it's hard to look at a quarterback with that kind of athleticism and mobility as the quarterback that he is.
Both will be on display at Soldier Field when the Bears come out of the bye week on the 21st. Should be a fun game to call indeed. Dan Pompei, along with Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. What's your takeaway, Dan, on number one right now?
Well, the last two games have really been impressive, and, he's made steady progress, and it's exciting to watch the growth. And he's come such a long way in such a short period of time. We didn't see what we've seen in the last game or two in the early outings of Justin Fields, and makes you wonder if he can continue to, accelerate his growth the way he has been accelerating it. And he clearly has special talent. And I think, the Bears coaches have continued to find ways to help him bring it out and show it. It's going to be fun to watch for the rest of the year to see where he goes with this.
For me, it's the stage. It was Monday night in that place. My ears were ringing all the way into yesterday, honestly, from that stadium. It was loud, and, granted, I keep my headphones up high, so that doesn't help, but it was just the moment. It was the stage, that second half, and the comeback, and the belief that he showed. I just think that's going to pay dividends. I think that probably turns some veterans' heads around a little bit, Dan, if they were thinking like this is a season where it's not going anywhere. We got a lot to play for because this guy could help us win games. Do you suspect that could trigger that thought out of the bye week?
Certainly it's possible. I think the thing about any great young quarterback is he is a harbinger of hope, and I think that's what we've felt with Justin Fields ever since the Bears moved up to draft him and shocked everybody. I think if you look at the fan base and which usually the media, which usually are reflections of the team, right? You've seen a lot of hope. And I think, for a while there, it looked like, maybe people were too hopeful or, to expect too much too soon. But now after these last two games, it kind of gives you a little reset and pushes everything forward again and makes you think, he can do some things. Maybe he can even get this team out of some jams and carry them in certain situations. You don't want to put too much on him because he's still a young player. But, if the Bears continue to be committed to the running game, if their defense can get back on track a little bit, they come up with some takeaways. That's the thing that really could help a quarterback, right? Give them some added possessions, and they've really, interceptions. I mean, they've been really deficient at that all season long, and they shouldn't be because they could rush the passer. So I think, it's like I said, it's going to be fun to watch this kid moving forward and the kind of impact he can have on the team.
Dan Pompei with us from The Athletic with Tom Thayer. I'm Jeff Joniak. One more segment to go. We'll dig into that defense a little bit with Danny here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Download the Chicago Bears app to play our new Predictor game. Risk It, brought to you by Bet Rivers for your chance to win $250 in free bets and a custom Bears jersey. With Tom Thayer, Jeff Joniak, Dan Pompei from The Athletic, our guest, Pro Football Hall of Fame writer. Tommy, you got the first question of this last segment with Dan. Go ahead.
Okay, I know we're going to talk about the defense a little bit more, but Dan, I'd like to pick your brain. So at the halfway point in the season, last year, Allen Robinson, 9.4 targets per game. This year, 5.5. At the halfway point this year, responsible for 17 first downs. At the end of last year, responsible for 68. Are you surprised the trading deadline came and went without any movement here? Because I love Allen Robinson. I love his commitment since the day he got here. But that I don't know. There are some guys that could have been baited in front of other teams, and it's just Allen Robinson. The numbers stick with me right now.
I get what you're saying, and I guess I wouldn't have been shocked if something happened, but it made sense to me not to trade him or not to make any big moves from this standpoint. First of all, you're trying to develop Justin Fields, and you want to give him every opportunity to develop. And even though the numbers, the production have been down with Allen, I think, he still is your most reliable target out there, and a guy who I frankly expect every week to do more than he's done in the past in the first half of the season. There's no reason why he shouldn't be doing more. And then I think the other thing is, you've got everyone is out there, coaching for their lives and playing for their jobs. And I think, you'd kind of send a bad message to the entire organization if you said, yeah, we're gonna go trade Allen Robinson and Akeem Hicks or whoever it is you're gonna trade, because everyone's out there trying their best and trying to make this work. And I think that would have been the wrong thing if I were the general manager.
Oh, so now going to the other side of the ball, you think about the defensive backfield and it's continuous and needs to continuously develop. Is Jalen Johnson a good guy to start the development of your defensive backfield with? It seems like he's been, up to covering the team's best receiver. He can move to each side of the field, but the other guys alongside of him probably need to increase their play.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I think, the secondary has been an issue pretty much all season long for the Bears, and an area where they need improvement, whether it comes internally or externally in the off season. Probably going to have to be some externally in the off season. But I think Jalen really has fulfilled the hope that Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy and Sean Desai had for him. Really has come on, had a good rookie season, obviously, and has been capable of stepping up into a more demanding, more difficult role this season, which, from that standpoint, kind of justified them for letting go of Kyle Fuller. Now, what didn't justify Kyle Fuller's departure is the play of Vildor on the other side, who has struggled all season long. So, they still need some help, I think, in that secondary.
Roquan Smith is having a good year, that's for sure. Dan Pompei, our guest here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. Remaining moments. He will get a contract. How much that is will be determined here in the months and weeks to come. But the future of a 25-year-old being a face of the defense, to me, it's him. And on the other side, it's Fields on offense. Is that fair? And, we see how he plays. He plays with a very aggressive style. How do you feel about Roquan as he stacks up among other NFL linebackers that have recently earned those big paydays?
Yeah, I think he's right there with him. There's a lot of good young inside linebackers, off-the-ball linebackers in the league. And, he's right there with them. And I think he's certainly stepped up this year. I think he's playing with more confidence. I think he, the value of a little experience that he's had is very evident in his play, the way he reads, the way he moves to the ball. His speed is coming out more this year, right? He looks faster this year because why? Because he's reading more, he's more confident, he understands more. And, I think the future is very bright for him, obviously. He's a guy who should be the face of this defense for a number of years now.
Well, let's talk Hall of Fame, because you're a part of that mix. You're on that board that helps select those class members. Jimbo Covert, Ed Sprinkle, this year's version. It was an honor for Tom and I to be on the field to introduce them in front of the fans a couple of weeks ago and get their Hall of Fame ring and portraits. The chances of Devin Hester. We talked about revolutionary when we talked about Clyde Emerick, and we want to throw him in there too. Are there going to be more categories for people like Clyde Emerick, like there was for Bill Nunn, the scout that went in from the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah, well, he would fall under the contributor category. Yeah. We've been getting one contributor in every year. And it'd be wonderful to see Clyde considered for that. There's a lot of competition for that one spot every year. You're competing with general managers, for instance. You're competing with scouts. There have been people talking about trainers who belong, or different. Ed Sable was a contributor from NFL Films. There's it's a broad category with a lot of different people in it. So maybe at some point Clyde would be considered. Certainly is worthy. Like I said, as far as Devin, his first year of eligibility, I have no doubt he is a Hall of Famer, and I have no doubt he will be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Just a matter of when he gets in. As I told Devin when I talked, and don't be disappointed if you don't get in the first year, because it's tough. There's so many qualified candidates from across the NFL, number of whom have been waiting for many years to get in. And the other thing that is unique about Devin's case, or not unique but rare, is that he's a special teams player, and we see how special teams players have been treated by Hall of Fame voters. It's taken them a long time to get in, the few who have gotten in, and you could count those on one hand, and then many others have not gotten in. But, Hester is different from any of them in that, to me, he's the Tom Brady of return men. So I think, if only he had like a radio announcer who could have given him a signature call, then he'd be a slam dunk.
Right. Yep. Go ahead, Tom. You're ridiculous.
Something like "You are ridiculous."
Yeah. Well, if it happens, it'll feel like a piece of me went in there. I will tell you that. Go ahead, Tom.
I'm sure you will be. You will be. They'll have your call in the Hall of Fame forever.
Dan, the conversation when you try to present, or you do a great job of presenting a guy like Jimbo Covert, because he's a little bit farther removed, but his production is undeniable. When you talk to the rest of the members of the group that you talk to on behalf of Jimbo Covert, what is the point that you have to make for some of these guys to recognize how talented of a guy he was immediately, not 2 or 3 years into his career? I played in a college all-star game, was a senior in college the same time Jimbo was. And he's the type of guy, when you shook his hand for the first time, that you knew that he was going to be a starter the day whatever team drafted him.
Yeah, Tom, I think, the challenge with Jimbo is he had two things that were kind of that made people overlook him. The first is that he only played in 2 Pro Bowls. Second was that he didn't have a real long career. But anyone like you or Jeff who saw him play would tell you that, he dominated everybody. So I think the challenge with him was just to get past that hurdle, which took something like, how many years did it take? 25 years of eligibility, whatever it was. And then we were fortunate to have a centennial class where we examined a lot of players that, had kind of slipped through the cracks of time. And fortunately, the committee members were able to look at what Jimbo did and how he dominated against great players like Lawrence Taylor, for instance, and just did it consistently over his career and was part of this incredible offensive line that, led the league in rushing for so many seasons, and obviously was a part of great team success too. So it was great to see Jimbo recognized.
We appreciate all your time and insight as always. We think the world of you, Danny. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's always good to be with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Dan.
The Athletics' Dan Pompei, our guest. Tom and I will continue our conversation on what looks like a very challenging second half of the season for the Bears, beginning with the Baltimore Ravens coming to Soldier Field next Sunday at a noon start. We'll talk about that and more coming up here on Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. This segment of Bears All Access is brought to you by CDW. People to get it. Jeff Joniak and Tom Thayer, our final segment tonight on Bears All Access, and hope you're enjoying your bye week all across the globe as we get you set for the second half of the season. First, though, as we touched on with Dan Pompei earlier this evening, the death of Clyde Emerick at the age of 90, the Bears and NFL's first strength coach passed away this week, and it was back in 2008 when the Bears honored Clyde Emerick by naming their weight room the Clyde Emerick Weight Room, and it was an impactful moment for Clyde, as he told Lauren Screeden of Inside the Bears.
Brian McCaskey called me and says, we're going to have a meeting with Ted on summer camp. I said, okay. So I got my stuff together because I helped him on summer camp with him. And so we go into Ted's office and I put my stuff down and Brian's there and Ted's there. And first thing Ted says, he says, this building is named after George Halas. What do you think? I says, terrific. Yeah, absolutely it should be. And the training center, as we call the bubble, is named after Walter Payton. I said, oh, absolutely. I said, it should be. Yeah, certainly. And she says, well, what do you think if we call the weight room the Clyde Emerick? Now, I'm like, okay. I mean, it was a total surprise. And obviously, it's an enormous compliment.
So what did it mean to him to have that room named in his honor? And we'll always be there now.
Clyde's a humble guy. And I think it's a reflection of his dedication to the Bears as an organization. I don't think outside ownership, there's anybody that's ever walked in that building has been more fair in his approach and how he treated everybody in that building. From a first rounder to a front office member, Clyde treated you the same. And He wanted to listen to you. He wanted to help educate you in whatever you were asking about his experiences in life, and he was able to do that. But I think more important, rather than his name on the side of that building, in the last 24 hours, I talked to a couple strength coaches around the NFL that work directly with Clyde Emerick. The way they go about their job is the way that they learn to go about their job from Clyde Emerick. And I think when he can carry on his legacy to other NFL teams, it means a lot to the Bears organization, but it means a lot to Clyde Emerick because he's inspired these guys that do the same job he does, and they want to do it like Clyde Emerick. And I think if you can inspire anybody in the world of whatever you do, if there's a broadcaster that goes on that wants to be like Jeff Joniak, or there's a guy that wants to be like Clyde Emerick, that's inspiring.
And here's how it all started.
The first Chicago Bear that I met was a fellow named Stan Jones, who happens to be in the Football Hall of Fame now. Super guy. Anyway, he happened to go to a place that I did a little working out at, and Stan Jones came in there and asked who was working out there, and this fellow said, well, Clyde Emerick worked out there. He said, I'd like to meet him. So we met. So then I took Stan to the Irving Park Y, where I did all my training through the years. Started working with him, and this isometric craze came out. And like you said, Coach Hallis wanted to know anything that would help improve the team. So he inquired about it, asked Stan Jones, and Stan said, well, I'm working out with a guy that knows about that. He said, well, can you bring him up? So he did. So I met George Hallis on several occasions and discussed procedure and what the results would be. And what I liked about him was, I'd say, okay, here's what this is all about. And okay, he'd write it down, and I'd say something else, he'd write it down. I thought, phew, he's writing everything down. I thought that was pretty neat. But it so happened that they won the World Championship that year in 1963. I don't know, I can't say that there was much because of the isometric, because it was all new. But point is, it kind of opened the door in 1971, and I became the strength coach here.
And you loved every minute of it, Tommy.
Listen, I hear so many stories about the Irving Park YMCA where Clyde started his weightlifting and how he grew attachments to Stan Jones. I sat with Stan Jones and talked to him for 2 days about what Clyde Emerick meant to him. The other stories along the way, the rehabilitation of Gale Sayers after his horrific knee injury, what he did for other members of the Chicago Bears playing family. It is, Clyde never took an approach where he was bigger than the game or he was bigger than what he wants you to be. And that was the most important thing about Clyde, because he tells me stories about, working out with Doug Buffon, and by the time Doug Buffon went to put a suit on, he couldn't fit anymore because Clyde turned him into a bigger player. The first time that Jim Finks asked him to go look at Dan Hampton to see if he thought he could become a player, and just the reflections that he had on appearance and what he could do for and to a player if he just had him in the weight room for a couple months.
And then you throw guys and the people are more familiar with nowadays. Obviously Olin Kreutz was always going to be in the weight room no matter what, but just that Roberto Garza, Cody Whitehair of today, and you're probably familiar with a little bit more of the guys that are so dedicated in the weight room up there right now that Clyde touched. So it's great history, great lineage that links so many generations of Bears football with the passing of Clyde Emerick.
I talked to Clyde last Thursday, and we were sitting in the room and talking. He was so inspired because within a 24-hour period, Doug Plank called him and Olin called him. And he was just so thankful that he could leave that impressions on these types of guys that are the stalwarts and the stars in the history of the Bears.
All right, so what's ahead? Matt Nagy on the Bears Coaches Show Monday night says, it's not going to be an easy second half.
The schedule better than anybody. I mean, we got some really good football teams ahead of us. So, and that's how it should be. We get that. We need to be able to beat all of those teams that are in front of us, and we really feel like with who we have and getting some of our guys back is going to be crucial. But it definitely makes you better, that's for sure. And I think really looking at Justin, for him to be able to play some of these defenses that he's seeing, he's done a really, really good job of, making the game slow down a little bit on defense but yet still making plays and being great Monday, through Saturday. And that's where we want to keep growing.
And that hopefully is the case. They got 9 games to do it, and it starts with Baltimore a week from Sunday.
Yeah, nothing's easy in the NFL. And that's the great thing about competition. And that's the great thing about the development of a team that everybody's pointed in the same direction. And I do think there's building blocks from that Steelers game that you can turn them into a positive that will help this team down the stretch.
All right, some quick hitters here. Most impressive play from a Bears player in the first 9 games of the season that maybe you didn't see coming?
The bendability in the corner of Robert Quinn. Here's a guy that really took, there was a lot of question marks about what he's really going to add to the team. Was he getting older? No, I think this year he looks better.
And I would go in the same direction, and I'm also pleasantly surprised with the play of Khalil Herbert. This guy can play in the league for a long time. He's got the instincts to do it, and he's got the quickness to do it. Defensively, you needed the stars to play at a star level. Injuries have obviously muted some of that. If these guys can get healthy, they can still be a dangerous defense in the second half.
Yeah, I think you still have to experience with the creativity of new defensive coordinator Sean Desai. Allow these guys to be in the most threatening positions they can possibly play in. And how is pressure on the opponent's quarterback going to compute into interceptions in the second half of the season as the weather deteriorates? And if they can get some turnovers, if they can create turnovers, this is a defense that have a different power.
Are you worried about the way they've handled the run game lately?
That's always a concern because, like I said, as conditions deteriorate in the second half of the season, teams will want to run the ball more often. What I saw out of the defensive front against the Steelers, to me, I think Eddie Goldman is playing a better brand of football. I think Akeem Hicks can still be as powerful as anybody on the defensive line. If you can get Bilal Nichols, Mario Edwards Jr., Angelo Blackson, Kairos Tonga, if they can all continue to elevate their play, I think this is a team that can still play the run pretty good.
All right, Tom, I'll let you go. Appreciate it. That's going to wrap up tonight's show with Tom Thayer. I'm Jeff Joniak. Thanks to Dan Pompei, and thanks of all to you for listening. Thanks to our producers, Dan Brilli and Jordan Tredup, and the folks here at The Score. That'll do it for us. This is Chicago Sports Radio, 670 The Score. Good night, everybody.